Welcome back to the Naughty Archaeologist podcast. We really appreciate you joining us from wherever you are in the world, and we appreciate you coming back after last week's audio boo-boo. I have since gone in and fixed the Santo Cristo de Burgos' files, and so it is now the correct file in its correct place. We had a double file input, folks. It was not great. So I appreciate you guys bearing with us. It's, new podcast hiccups. So that has since been corrected, and now it's only 2 hours. So thanks for sticking with us. Buckle in, we've got another great episode coming up for you. Today, we are talking about the Hatsushima Island shipwreck with Dr. Mike Perrin, who works for the Asian Research Institute for Underwater Archaeology, otherwise called ARIUA. We did have a few technical difficulties with this interview, considering he is located out of Tokyo and I am in the United States, and so there was some internet connection loss and then some sound issues, and so I have gone through and fixed that as best I can, but we just want you to be aware, we're working on it, and I am cognizant of the issues. Now, aside from that, no other real announcements for anything at this point. We are really excited to talk about the Hatsushima Island shipwreck. So without further ado, let's get wet, nerds.
Avast! It's complicit. The timbers were way too big, but what really tells the story are thousands of pieces. We looked at them all. The treasure was not gold or silver, it was the people.
Welcome back, nerds. Now you gotta think about it. A picturesque honeymooner's escape, resorts, hot springs, wonderful sushi fresh caught from Sagami Bay, right off the coast about 25 miles or 40 kilometers for our international nerds, is this beautiful little town, Atami, in Shizuoka Prefecture, and it sits on the coast of Sagami Bay. You can see Mount Fuji. The Izu Peninsula is a vacationer's paradise. But every night, after sunset, emerging from the sea, soaked in seawater, kelp, and a gaunt face, a samurai wearing old armor from the Edo period emerges from the waves. Now, is that story true? Who's to say? Local legends are local legends. But there have been some stories passed down over the years of a quote-unquote sodden samurai. Now, my story was very much editorializing and is not entirely word for word the history of what actually may or may not have happened. Ghost stories have a tendency to lose people in either their passage down through generations or, details get changed, embellishments get made. But that doesn't negate the fact that there is something off the coast of Atami City. Just 10 kilometers, or about 3.5 miles, off the coast of Atami City is Hatsushima Island. Hatsushima Island has a little resort on the west end and a little dive shop and is mostly a fishing ground in the waters surrounding it. But around the 1970s, 1980s, fishermen started being a little more vocal about what they were finding in their nets. And what they were finding are roof tiles and grinding bowls. But there was something different about these roof tiles. Outside of this, roof tiles aren't generally that interesting. However, some of these roof tiles had a very familiar, to a Japanese historian's eye, crest, also known as a mon, of 3 hollyhock leaves in a circle. I've seen a couple conflicting sources say that it is actually a wild ginger. However, most of the sources you'll find on the Tokugawa family crest show it as a hollyhock, the transliteration from the kanji Maru Nimitsu Aoi. A-O-I, I don't know how to pronounce that very well. It's just all vowels. There are 3 hollyhock leaves that meet in the center at their points in a circle. In Japan, the name Tokugawa carries a lot of heft. The Edo period is also sometimes known as the Tokugawa era, because the Tokugawa family was the shogun. And so that means that this wreck is a pretty significant find in terms of archaeological use. The Tokugawa period starts in 1600, when Tokugawa Ieyasu, Tokugawa being the family name, wins the battle at Sekigahara. Tokugawa then establishes a hegemony? I don't know how to say that word. And essentially, Tokugawa centralizes power into the shogun and essentially controls all of Japan. But rather than rule from Osaka or Kyoto, he chooses to build a castle in Edo, modern-day Tokyo. Edo becomes a cultural center and is actually quite popular among the population, and it grows pretty extensively. And despite normal historical struggles such as, famine and rebellion, the Tokugawa period stretches from 1600 until the Meiji Restoration in about 1867, 1868-ish. By 1650, Edo had about 300,000 people, but a large fire killed about 100,000 of them in 1657. But they keep rebuilding, and by around 1720, it had a population of almost 1 million people, making it the largest city in the world at the time. Additionally, the population inside the Tokugawa shogunate are enjoying a time of internal peace, political stability, economic growth under the shogun, and essentially the shogunate is a military dictatorship. However, it put an end to the almost constant state of violence that Japan had been in for the past hundreds of years. And just like with the Great Fire of Edo in 1657, there are always going to be things that happen. Japan is a highly geologically active area. I don't know if you guys have heard about the Ring of Fire, but they're a big part of it. It's smack on that fault line. And so Japan experiences earthquakes at a pretty regular pace. And so in 1700, you have the Great Cascadia Quake and an orphan tsunami that comes and hits the coast. Additionally, you also have the 1703 Genroku Quake, which actually gives rise to a period of time known as the Genroku period. The University of Pittsburgh says, quote, Genroku, the era name for the years 1688 to 1704, is commonly used to refer to the entire rule of the 5th Tokugawa shogun, Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, from 1680 to 1709. It is sometimes even used more broadly to include the flowering of culture, especially among the townsmen, from the middle of the 17th to the middle of the 18th centuries. During this period, there was an increase in literacy in the cities, agricultural productivity increased, and urban areas grew. As unprecedented affluence came to a larger number of merchants and artisans in the cities, their demand for goods and services stimulated the development of new styles of clothing, entertainment, and arts tailored to their tastes. Unlike the samurai, who were disciplined by an obligation to perform military and administrative service, urban commoners were free to devote themselves to making and spending money. While no was considered the form of drama appropriate to the samurai, kabuki and puppet theater, which developed from the early 17th century, were shaped increasingly by townspeople. And the Genroku era is celebrated as the golden age of both types of theater. A major development in poetry was the evolution of Matsuo Basho's style of haikai no renga and haiku composition. The era is also characterized by a flowering of scholarship among the samurai, especially in the study of Confucianism. The image popularly invoked by the name of Genroku is a time of prosperity, extravagance, and indulgence, with only the vendetta of the 47 Ronin incident to remind people of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. End quote. Now, I know that was long, but it really encapsulates everything from the Genroku period. But because of incidences like the Genroku earthquake and the 1700 tsunami and the 1657 fire, and, things actually age too. Sometimes you just got to keep up with maintenance. Edo Castle needed roof tiles. And so, archaeologists believe, because of the roof tiles found on this Hatsushima Island shipwreck, that maybe it's associated with Edo Castle. And so we've brought on Dr. Mike Perrin, who is an Oxford scholar with the Asian Research Institute of Underwater Archaeology, ARIUA, and we're asking him today about his experience working on the Hatsushima Island shipwreck. And we jump in kind of in the middle of our conversation. Both Mike and I have pretty rampant ADHD, and so our interview was cut from 2 hours and 33 minutes down to what you hear today. And it's a little funny because every single time I cut something out and then came back to it, it's like we never left off. So you're hearing a pretty unrearranged interview. I've just simply cut things from things that were irrelevant that we got sidetracked on. Like at one point, I think we went off on university experiences and my history in the military. So we're jumping right into the interview of where I cut us in. In this interview, you'll hear Mike talk about his history with Japan and Japanese archaeology, Japanese maritime archaeology, as well as going into how they discovered this shipwreck, how they started the excavations on it, as well as talking about what got people interested in this, which is mostly samurai, ninjas, ninja samurai, and also ghost samurai, as we talked about in the beginning. So, without further delay, let's pull Mike Perrin into the water. Mike, welcome to the podcast. We hope you've got tons of time to talk to us today. Did you ever think your career would take you to places like Japan and the Hatsushima Island wreck and maritime archaeology like this?
I've got plenty of time. I had thought that I was only going to do archaeology. And then I think I chose to do maritime while I was at Oxford, just because I was doing Japanese archaeology. But maritime and underwater archaeology, nautical archaeology, that's the sort of backdoor I was able to get into mainstream Japanese archaeology with. And so that was the key, really. And so now I'm in Japanese university teaching and things like that, which is kind of unheard of for a foreigner. And so I do Western Pacific and Japanese archaeology by trade, I suppose, as far as publications and whatnot. What got me into it was probably Roman and stuff like that in Greek. I think it was Rome Total War 1 or 2 that got me into archaeology. I said, wow, this is great. I'm going to do archaeology. And then it started to do Rome stuff. I'd lived in Japan for decades. So I was working, and still am working, for Colorado State University. I've never been to Colorado, but my email ends in colostate.edu. So what they do, the Navy sort of contracts out an archaeologist that Colo State provides. And so they interviewed and now pay me to be the U.S. Navy liaison to the Guam SHPO, the Guam State Historic Preservation Office, which is funny because Guam is not a state. So
it is a U.S. territory, though.
They call it the SHPO anyway. So this Hatsushima thing.
Let me jump in real quick. Can you introduce yourself and tell me kind of like what your position is with the Tokyo University and then specifically we'll jump into how you started and heard about the wreck, like how you got kind of into it.
My name is Mike Perrin. I am one of the archaeologists, usually what you might call a principal investigator. I don't know if you went into a private company, but I am a lead investigator for ARIUA, which is the Asia Research Institute for Underwater Archaeology. It's linked in with Tokyo University of Marine Science, or TUMSAT for short or long. And I guess the head of ARIUA and the top maritime archaeology at TUMSAT is Akifumi Iwabuchi. He does a lot of footwork, and so he's around the world and whatnot at any given time. We do quite a few projects, usually in the cold, wintry waters that don't have as much plankton bloom, and so therefore better visibility. It does make the onsens feel nicer when you get in them. These are the hot spring baths that you get in after you dive in Japan. Unfortunately, against all diving medical advice, the Japanese divers do tend to get out of the onsen and go straight into drinking sake. This is obviously not the safest thing for decompression sickness. But there it is. That's sort of Japanese maritime archaeology in a nutshell, depending on whom you're diving with. But Akifumi Iwabuchi pretty much sets up a lot of our programs and digs, and he does a lot of international presentation work. His specialty is fishing weirs in Japan and in Indonesia, where I think he did a lot of his field work for his Oxford degree. He's a senpai of mine at the same college at Oxford, which is Wolfson College. Oxford colleges tend to be a bit focused on what they study. A lot of archaeologists, and most of the maritime department tends to be out of St. Cross College or Wolfson College, Oxford. And they sort of share a rowing team as well. So they're kind of sister colleges within the same University of Oxford. So yeah, if anybody ever wants to do a degree in archaeology at Oxford, St. Cross College tends to be a really good one, and Wolfson as well. The Asian Research Institute for Underwater Archaeology is kind of an amalgam of different archaeologists, I would say top maritime archaeologists in Japan, because the field really hasn't developed uniformly like it has in Britain or the US or even Australia or most of Europe or a lot of countries. I teach at Ritsumeikan, which is a private university in Kyoto. When I first got into Japanese archaeology, so the Americans from, say, Washington, who was my connection, I think I went through Central Washington University to sign up for a program in Japan where I already lived. So long story short, that program got me into Japanese circles of archaeology. And then I went on, started doing my master's degree at Oxford, where they sort of focused me in on maritime stuff, because I'd been diving since I was 14. I'd been into Japan since I was 14 and 13. So there've been a lot of projects with, say, ARIUA, which brings me, I guess, to the Hatsushima project. It's a project that I guess started way back in the 70s. So a lot of tiles, roofing tiles and sort of whetstones that were being traded from what was the production zone of Japan, which is Osaka in the west. Those tended to be shipped on up into what is now Tokyo in the east. That's how the Edo period worked. So the Edo period was from, say, 1600-ish until the late 1800s, just after the American Civil War, where the Tokugawa shoguns ruled Japan and had a very good centralized system. So everyone was quite loyal to the shogun, and so local governments were easy to run. But it was similar, Edo or Tokyo was similar to what Rome was. So all roads led to Edo, sea roads, land routes. So there was the big Tokaido route that you see all the woodblock prints from Hokusai and Hiroshige with Mount Fuji in the background, these beautiful sort of landscapes that you see on color woodblock prints through the ages were all sort of done from different viewpoints along these famous sort of routes between Osaka and Kyoto, which are in the sort of same locale, paying homage up into Edo. And so then the sea routes would take goods made in Osaka, Kyoto, that region's called the Kansai, and then they would sort of ship them up to the Kanto, which is Tokyo, which is Edo, which can be confusing for a lot. And this sea route was great because after production, prevailing currents would just push the ships quite rapidly up northeast towards Edo or Tokyo. Now, getting back was obviously a bit different. They had to sail, use wind, and maybe even row to some extent. And if it was in the summertime and early autumn, typhoons were also a problem. Always shipping goods, getting goods on time to Edo was never a problem because they always had the prevailing currents. But this ship that was sunk off of Hatsushima was what we think might have been a victim of a typhoon, but we can't really be sure unless we find something like an anchor, which has not been found. We found a few anchors around, but nothing, and some even contemporary, but nothing having to do with this particular ship.
What is it about the anchors that would give you an indication of how the ship went down?
One good example of this, I'll give you an example just to clarify it, is the Mongol invasion of Japan in the 1200s consisted of hundreds and hundreds of Korean-made ships, Korea being under the sort of government of the Mongols at the time. When they invaded, these typhoons came and sank their whole fleets. So we have hundreds and hundreds of ships, and quite a few of which have remnants of anchors as well. And they're all sort of facing the same direction because how the wind was pulling these ships. A typhoon will always pull ships in one direction quite strongly. And so you see anchors at quite a considerable angle. And so these angles will show, if it's a considerable angle, it's going to be a really heavy storm. And so we know through archives that the Mongol ships sank because of typhoons. And therefore we know the angles. So we're looking for something along those lines as far as how the anchor was buried. Now, having said that, Japanese sea bottom floors tend to be, some areas can be silty or muddy, which is great because then you know there's less movement of artifacts in the sub-bottom sort of profile. But with a lot of the Japanese sand tends to be this volcanic, heavy, almost pebble-like sand. In other words, things can move quite easily under that sand. A ship will be preserved and its cargo would be preserved quite well under the sand, but it shifts quite often. With typhoons, even typhoons that are hundreds of miles away, that will cause a swell near the seafloor that can shift a lot of things. If you have multiple anchors that are facing one direction, that can be a sign of one particular event, typhoon. That's something of what we're looking for. It would be a bonus. But we found a lot of artifacts to help date things. The ship itself helped date it to what's called the Genroku period. So first of all, I'll just give you an idea of space and place on Hatsushima. It's an island off of the Izu Peninsula, which is near Mount Fuji.
I know it's off Atami City of Shizuoka Prefecture.
That's right. Hakone would be a sort of touristy place. A day trip from Tokyo would be Hakone, which is a kind of sub-mountain area just below the sort of mother mountain of Mount Fuji. And so Hatsushima, even if you go to Tokyo and ask people, so do you know where Hatsushima is? They don't know, even though it's probably the nearest offshore island to Japan. And Japan's 3,000 islands, but it's the nearest island to the mainland of the Tokyo area. Anyway, very few people live there. They were all doing fishing, and what's great about it for the archaeological team is that the ryokan, or the inn that we stay at, all these inns that are run there on the island are run by guys with their fishing boats that go out and take fresh catches of, a variety of things: tuna, sea bream, tai. What's tai? I know a lot of fish names in Japanese that I don't know in English, and my native tongue is English. So I've just been in Japan all along. But tai would be snapper in American English. Yeah. A lot of good fish around that island. So Hatsushima was also near, if you're looking at a map of Japan, and I recommend anyone listening to the podcast sort of look at a map of Japan, and the Izu Peninsula, which is just to the south of Mount Fuji. And if you look at it, there's one huge resort hotel on the sort of west end of the island. The wreck lies off of the sort of southwest end of the island, just maybe a 5 or 10 minute swim off the island is the actual wreck site. It's in maybe 15 to 20 meters deep of water, and it sort of goes down a bit. So maybe 20 to 30 meters, I'd say, under the sort of subsurface.
And for all my friends out there who require freedom units, that's about 65.5 feet to almost 100.
So back in the 70s, a lot of fishermen would bring up tiles and whetstones in their fishing nets. And this was quite normal. And they thought, wow, there's something under here. There's these roofing tiles. That's strange. Maybe a house during a typhoon was washed offshore, they might have thought. So in about 20 meters water, there's a sort of square-shaped area of what's left of the cargo that's somewhat exposed. But you can see this sort of open square facing down, kind of like this open square that you'd see at an eye doctor's office.
Mike sent me a handful of photos for this episode. And so don't forget to check the Instagram, because that's where I'll be posting a lot of the things that he's referencing when he refers to visual cues.
On the left is a lot of roofing tiles, and they're all sort of caked together due to barnacles and coral sort of being the sort of paste that keeps them together. But back in 1978, I think the water company, the local sort of water company, was doing pipe construction. And then they found the main feature by accident. We didn't start doing ROV or AUV surveys until maybe 2011 to 2015.
For folks new to the show, ROV is remote operated vehicle, and AUV is autonomous underwater vehicle.
A lot of the cargo that was there was all sort of different sort of products that were made in Osaka or around the area of Osaka. So all the craftspeople and shops that would make these items were pretty much based in Osaka. Maybe a lot of the sort of resources or the material base goods could have been sent from different parts of Western Japan, but all the sort of craft shops were probably more or less in Osaka itself. So the main thing that was the sort of eye-opener for this cargo ship were roofing tiles. And there's three, when you talk about roofing tiles, here we get into the nerdy bits. There are three types of roofing tiles. There's the flat tiles that you're used to when you see Japanese roofs. And that's the flat tiles, or hira, kawara. So kawara are the roof tiles, kawara. If you go to Kyoto, there's the posh area is called Kawara Machi, or Kawara District. Because in most of the Edo period, the shogunate outlawed or made illegal using roofing tiles. Most roofing was sort of thatched back in the day. So these flat tiles, that's what we normally see. But off to the roof eaves at the bottom of the roof, where it sort of becomes an eave over the sort of patio, a sort of walkway that's just outside the windows, you have these sort of round things that shoot out. And those are round roofing tiles. They're not tiles as such as we think of tiles in English, but they're these sort of round things that come out over the eaves. And this is where you start to get more signatorial, where you're starting to see roofing tiles that have their own individual characters or characteristics. So the flat tiles will have their own characteristics, but usually in Japan at any given time in history, roofing tiles are somewhat like bricks in Europe or the US. to where you see a certain type of brick at a certain time in history because they're factory made. The same sort of went for Japan. They were made by craftspeople, but they were made kind of like the ukiyo-e woodblock prints. They're sort of made with a factory type process. They're sort of being printed out or put out en masse fashion. So you see those sort of sandwiching a flat tile in between them. The sort of flat tile that you're probably looking at it looks maybe like a lotus or something that's put in a flat sort of Facebook profile wallpaper or whatever cover photo, that sort of panorama length. And it's got its own sort of signatorial engraving. But then the round tiles will have their own types of engravings as well. Now, a lot of the roofs would have the one you're looking at, the sort of looks like yin and yang, but with three sort of revolving sort of comet-looking things. So that was really popular and still is. On a lot of Tokugawa buildings that the shogunate owned, they might have had, if they were directly involved with the Tokugawa family, they might have the Tokugawa's family crest on them. But the third sort of roofing tile is called an onigawara. The oni are the sort of Japanese demons. They're not demons in the sort of Christianic sense, like they're evil and you've got to avoid them. They're sort of more in the, Native American sense, to where they ward off evil spirits. And I guess they could sort of be directly translated as gargoyle tiles or something like that. They're sort of like gargoyles would be in Europe.
Gargoyles are specific to water features. All others are simply grotesques.
Exactly. They sort of began, these gargoyle tiles or onigawara, they began with Buddhist temples. And Buddhist temples usually have really cool ones where they've got the teeth and they're very intimidating and sort of ward off evil spirits. Most of the feudal lords or the samurai would use them to show their family crest. And that's what made this Hatsushima wreck site really, really interesting, was that the onigawara, or the oni gargoyle roofing tiles, had the crest of Tokugawa Ieyasu. That is to say, the shogunate, the government of Japan at the time. We realized this wasn't just a simple cargo ship. This was an elite find. We had found something having to do with the government of Japan. Having said before, that time in history, so we'd provenanced the shipwreck at the Genroku period, which was roughly the first 10 years of the 1700s. And 1703, there was a huge, massive earthquake called the Genroku earthquake.
Just a quick post-production note. We lost audio at this point in the conversation and had to reestablish it. And so the audio from this point on sounds a little bit different from the previous audio of the rest of the interview, and it never really gets better. I am trying to fix it, and I clean it up as best I can, but just so you're aware, it got a little rough at this point. But Mike still has some excellent points and a lot more story to tell, so keep going.
With these three types of roofing tile, in other words, they're almost like stone toolkits for the modern age. It's a kit of three different types of tile, all made in a different way. So if you can grab together the three different roofing tiles, then you've got basically a toolkit or a product kit, and you can use typology to figure out what's going on. One photo I showed you was this 1615 to 1720, which is a period of about 100 years. The roofing tiles were forbidden on the tops of houses. So you have all these different types of really cool Japanesque-looking types of houses. One will have stones to keep planks and shingles on top of the roof, whereas in the West, we nailed them down. Sometimes cats can be used, as seen by the center photo, to hold down roofing shingles, but a lot of them were thatched. Or they did, in fact, nail them down this third photo, you can see this long house with a sort of ribbing going all the way from one side to the other of the roof. But suffice to say, the first century of the Edo period, or the Tokugawa shogunate, people were not allowed to have these roofing tiles for a variety of reasons. It's expensive to make, and it wasn't something factory produced. Until we get into that Genroku period, obviously, you see that it becomes legal to use for the standard house from 1720 onwards. That's another thing. You can see that trade starts to get more intense. Things start to get more mass-produced long before we sort of think of things being mass-produced in Europe. So all these different roofing tiles. But the main thing, again, that we realized it was the shogun's castle roofing tiles was that the onigawara, the gargoyle tile, had the Tokugawa family crest on it. And this was very rare. Only a few castles would have that throughout Japan, namely Edo Castle, the main castle, being one of them. Sunpu Castle, which is the real home of the Tokugawa shogunate. Tokugawa Ieyasu retired after only a couple of years as shogun to his home castle in Shizuoka, which is right there at the top of the Izu Peninsula, just at the foot of Mount Fuji. So that's sort of home castle for Tokugawa Ieyasu. He only made Edo, i.e. Tokyo, in order to be an economic, huge, massive center for Japan. And so all goods again are shipped up to Edo. Well, Hatsushima is an island just off of the sort of main, I guess in American English, I would call a way station. So you have all these huge trucks in America, and every, a few hundred miles or whatever, you have way stations on the side where I think the American Highway Patrol will weigh a truck. Yeah, and then, trucks will go to the truck stop. What is it? The Flying J, I think I remember. Yeah, Flying J of 76 or something like that, to have a coffee before they get arrested for having too much cargo. And so, but that's what was happening at the very bottom tip of this Izu Peninsula, was a town called Shimoda. And Shimoda was this way station outpost. The magistrate office is the direct translation, what the Japanese call a bugyosho. That's where they're making sure that they're not taking in contraband items, that they're not engaging in illegal trade, and that they're not sort of imbibing too much maybe on sake. From, I think, up until about almost the same time, 1720-ish, that was the checkpoint, was this Shimoda checkpoint at the tip, the bottom tip of the Izu Peninsula. So once they made the rounds, they'd go up towards Tokyo Bay, and then they'd enter there. Now, from 1720-ish onwards, the checkpoint was actually in the entrance to Tokyo Bay, and that's what my doctoral thesis was about, was the checkpoint of Uraga. And the Uraga also eventually became the trading point for the Spanish-Japanese trade in silver to silk. The Japanese used gold a lot, really valued gold, but they had a lot of silver as well, but really didn't trade or use silver in Japan in the post-medieval time. So the Spanish were keen to give silks from the Manila galleon trade to the Japanese for silver, so something that they had in abundance on both sides. So the Japanese were really not fond of the Spanish. Just before Tokugawa Ieyasu, the roofing tiles that we found were, in fact, part of Edo Castle, a sort of sub-team on the Hatsushima wreck project is a team out of Naples University in Italy. They're very good maritime archaeologists in their own right. I think Daniele Petrella, who is the head of their contingent, his theory was that the roofing tiles were right on the main keep of the castle, of the Edo Castle. However, the onigawara, or the gargoyle tiles, were very small and would not possibly be on that part of the castle. So what I did was actually go to Edo Castle itself and provenanced the items, all three of the design and the sort of year they were made. And I've come up with the theory. I haven't published anything on it, but I have done the actual footwork and research, and I am pretty sure that these roofing tiles were replacement roofing tiles after the Genroku earthquake for the guardhouses at the Ote Gate, which is, I suppose, the main gate of Edo Castle. In these guardhouses, there were two main guardhouses. There was the Shakunin Bansho, which is the 100-man guard gate. The tiles that I provenanced were from a possibility of two buildings. And these are both at the same main gate of the Edo Castle. The first one I sent was this long building called the 100 Doshin Samurai. Well, that's not the name of the building. That's what we're in the building. We're 100 samurai of the Doshin persuasion. So Doshin samurai were regular people. They weren't of the samurai class, but they were really good fighters. Basically, what happened after the Sengoku period, ninja were outlawed. What at the time were called shinobi no mono, men, people of shinobi. It's the same Chinese character for ninja. Ninja is more of a popular modern construct, the word ninja. But these ninja, their swords were taken away, all their corny, gimmicky ninja tools were taken away, and they were actually given pistols. So they were given pistols, but they were called Doshin samurai. They were low ranking. And these samurai were from the provinces of that list of 4 in that photo of the 100 Doshin samurai. So the Iga ninja, the Koga ninja, the Negoro, and the Niju Goki, which were very lesser sort of unknowns. But Iga, Koga are very famous ninja families. People into the ninja themselves would understand that immediately. So that was the two main ninja sort of clans of Sengoku period, of the samurai period, was the Iga ninja and the Koga ninja. So these eventually became Doshin samurai, i.e. the elite guard for the shogun's castle, the ninja houses. And they were housed in this building. So what is up with this wreck and its sort of relation to these ninja families? So you start to get into some cool stuff here. You've got 100 ninja that were the cream of the crop that were in this long building. The problem with these long buildings, especially when they have these heavy roofing tiles on them, so when earthquakes occurred with these long top-heavy buildings, they would twist. In other words, the east end of the building, of the long end of the building, might have gone south, while the west end might have twisted north. The whole building's twisting. And so these were really susceptible to collapse back in the Edo period. Well, even buildings that still exist. A lot of the buildings that you see in the recent New Year's earthquake up north in Japan this year, and where I've lived as well in the same sort of region, were all kawara or tile-roofed buildings. They're these old buildings from the Edo period. They're just basically a mud wall with a bit of wood facing, just to look nice. Just top-heavy with all these heavy roof tiles. The round ones, the flat ones, the big gargoyle ones, they're really top-heavy. And so when these big earthquakes come along, especially the sideways earthquakes, side shakers are really bad for those houses. You can sort of see the puzzle coming together on these things. This was a cargo ship bringing or trying to bring roofing tiles up to Edo for these guardhouses, because especially this long one, the 100 samurai, the Shakunin Bansho, twisted to collapse, and then they would just bring out new roofing tiles from the Osaka area where they made them for this guardhouse. Nothing's published on that. It's just me doing footwork and finding out that it's a really slow process, the Hatsushima wreck. I mean, 1 year they'll do 3D photogrammetry, mosaic photo taking, and maybe put something together. The next whole year, they'll come back and maybe take one of the tiles up for sort of curation. But yeah, with that Hatsushima wreck, the theory that I have, and I say theory in that I haven't published anything on it, but I've gone and done my footwork and data gathering and can fairly confidently say that it is roofing tile work from the the 100 Samurai guardhouse at the main gate of Edo Castle. The smaller building, which is the sort of check-in point right at the gate. The photo up there with the long, narrow housing that I think twisted to its death, that's where they live, or lived, or their ghosts live now. And the bottom one is where they actually worked in shifts, the Doshin Bansho, the Doshin Samurai guardhouse. It's much more easy on the eyes. It's a nice looking building right there at the gate, at the Otemon, or the Ote Gate. So if you're ever in Tokyo, go to the Ote Gate, check those guardhouses out, and you can see the roofing tiles. They're the same exact ones that we found on the wreck. Possibilities of what happened to the wreck, why it sank. So it could have been a typhoon. However, just the sort of mysterious, clandestine feel you get when you see who was housed in these buildings that these roofing tiles were for. The ninja of Iga and Koga. Was there some clandestine? Now, this could be something for the History Channel. I mean, it's so close to the shore there at Hatsushima that it could have been sabotaged as well. Who knows? Because a lot of these outlying islands, a lot of ne'er-do-wells, sort of pirate types, would hang out occasionally. Probably, though, not so much in the Edo period, especially that well into the Edo period, but it's possible. Who knows? And maybe people were stealing something. It could be. I think a huge percentile chance is that it was a typhoon or just bad weather in general.
I think, Occam's razor, it's just the simplest explanation usually is just storms. They're really common, they're everywhere, and they're sailors' worst nightmares.
Who knows?
Tell me a little bit about what type of ship the Hatsushima wreck could have been.
It's called kaisen, which just means it's a cargo ship. Kai means doing the rounds, a circuit ship. And the biggest of these is called the Higaki kaisen. Higaki is just the lattice work that's sort of on the rear ends of the ship, the rear half of the ship. They were sailing ships, but they could be rowed as well. But with all of these cargo ships in Japan, they were flat-bottomed. So they were not deep-hulled, so they couldn't do really long trips in a stable way. They really were susceptible to bad weather. And so they were always, even with the slightest storm, looking for shelter. But the thing is, the part of the island that it sank was the southwest side. That's the side that would be the brunt of the typhoon, where they would not take shelter. And we haven't found the anchor yet, so they could have still have been in motion trying to get to the other side of the island to shelter. It could have been a winter storm. That's another possibility. It could have been overburdened with tiles to where it just sank. There's a famous kind of modern wreck very near off the city of Atami, which is cool for recreational divers, where I think a granite stone carrier cargo ship in the 1970s or 80s was sunk and split in two and sank to about 100 feet. That's a good wreck dive as well. So yeah, it goes pretty deep, really awesome. So there's a lot of good diving around Japan. And what's really good about it is they're not easily able to bring things up. I mean, the tiles are all caked together by coral. So most of the tiles, some of them are sort of taken apart. I think what they did was to take the gargoyle tiles and they hammered them off of the wreck. One of them's up in the little primary school up on the island. And then we 2 or 3 years ago took another to curate and look at. No stone is left unturned in Japan, but the process is very, very slow. And if it's in a small village or small island like this, the process is slowed down even 10 more times. So, and then there is the funding as well that is lacking for the Hatsushima project.
I wanted to talk about one more side point because I was going through the notes, and it was like, the shipwreck site was officially found in the latter half of 1970s by a constructor of underwater pipelines which supplied pure water to Hatsushima Island from mainland. And this is all obviously translated, which is why I think Dr. Akifumi recommended you, is because he saw my Google translated email and was just like, I can't with this girl.
Well,
Because
his exact words
I
to
probably
me,
sound like a crazy person.
his exact words to me were, he says, I don't like these podcasts. What is podcast? And I said, well, it's just the 21st century, Akifumi. Yeah.
It's casual. I totally understand if he doesn't want to do it. That's completely okay. But it also says, in addition, so even before, however, it has been known by fishermen that roof tiles and grindstones have sometimes been caught by fishing nets. In addition, the islanders have inherited legends. Do you know what legends I'm talking about?
The islanders have made a lot of speculation, is what he's saying, as to what. And over the years, these have become sort of not legends, but something like that, sort of established speculation. Kind of sort of like Yonaguni being man-made rather than a natural occurrence, or the Giant's Causeway. So
it's very
modern,
much
modern legend, maybe.
There is a ghost story attached to this.
Oh, right. I did not know that.
It says, so the phrasing is translated, so bear with me here. In addition, the islanders have inherited legends testifying that at the shipwreck, night after night, a sodden samurai who wore armor used at the time landed on the western shore of Hatsushima Island from the bottom of the sea. We have a ghost samurai that told everyone about this wreck.
See, I didn't know
He was like,
about
guys,
that.
come get me, please.
Huh. I did not know about that. Now I've got to go to the island and dive this summer just to find more out about that. Or maybe
you gotta find that
week.
samurai. He needs to be
This
found.
week, actually. I'm going to play
He is
golf
begging.
and dive.
Oh no, what a terrible summer.
It could stand to reason that they would have one of the ninja or Doshin samurai on board just to make sure that the roofing got there, but maybe not.
This has been incredible, and I love being able to talk to archaeologists from all over the world. This is the best part of the job, and it's all about the people. It's always been about the people, and we are so stoked to be able to cut this together and put this out for everybody. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot.
Well, nerds, there you have it. The Hatsushima Island shipwreck sits off the coast of Hatsushima Island and Atami City. Still to this day, and ongoing work is continuing this summer with Dr. Perrin as well as Dr. Akifumi Iwabuchi. And the ARIUA team is continuing to make headway with this wreckage. So keep your eyes peeled for more news about the wreck. Hopefully we'll see something by the end of the season. Well, that's our show today, guys. We are on social media. We are on Twitter, X, and Instagram as @naughtipodcast. We have a Gmail that you can send us ideas to at thenautipod@gmail.com. And we are also on YouTube and TikTok as @naughtipod. And so those are spelled a little differently from naughty. We are nautical, NAUTIPOD, nauticpod. Like you just cut off the nautical. You get it. So I hope to see you guys next week. We're going to be talking about Uluburun, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you guys about that shipwreck because it's really special in the field of maritime archaeology. A special thanks to Mike Perrin and Dr. Akifumi for recommending him. We really appreciate that from him. He didn't have to do that, and it was very nice of him to recommend him. It was a great interview. We really appreciate that, guys. And so, I'll see you guys next week. Go get wet, nerds.